religion or another belongs in the centre of our society. I hope you will judge us by our principles and our policies and the compassion and the way that they fit in with the second of the New Testament commandments, and excuse us for the first. In my own life, I'm married to a Catholic. I made that pledge that I would support the Catholic upbringing. I put my children through Catholic school. I attend the Catholic Church very regularly in support of the religious commitment of my family. But I think I do agree with the party that religion is a personal thing.
Anne, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, well, I was born and brought up a Christian, went to a state faith school, both primary school and secondary school, and it was an incredibly important part of my life, and still is. That said, I felt my faith was tested enormously when my husband was dying of cancer, aged 34, and I did wonder, as I've got a friend at the moment who's struggling with cancer in Welwyn Garden City, I did wonder, what is my life about? And actually, I've been a great believer in when God shuts the door, he opens a window, and sometimes you may not know what path you're supposed to go. And I'm a great believer in public service, and so I like to think that my faith has kept me strong in the belief, because I do believe in the resurrection, and I do believe I'll meet my husband again. I have a bit of a problem, and the vicar and I, before my husband died, discussed this, because I said, if I remarry, which I have done to Andrew, is which husband do I get to meet up with in heaven? And he just said, God will sort it out. I think my second husband will sort it out for me, because he doesn't believe in God, and so therefore he can't meet me in a place he doesn't believe in. So I think we may have that one sorted. But I do believe that the Christian faith is hugely important in this country. I do believe that Cameron was right to say, the Prime Minister was right to say in 2014 that we are a Christian country, and I know he was pilloried by many letters into the Telegraph saying that, but I think we are. I think it is something that has sustained us. I think it would be a sad thing if we lost sight of it, and I see the good work that has come out of many people who do have faith, other faiths as well as a Christian faith, but I have a Christian faith and a Christian background. I'm proud to say I have, and I like to think it has given me a sense of purpose in my life, as well as the fact that I know there are other people less fortunate than me who haven't had that upbringing, but still have had very good and prayerful lives in other ways. And as Jack said, the Green Party may have a different view to his own personal views. I am upset that some parties, like the Green Party, want to abolish faith schools, because I actually believe, having seen what wonderful young children you've got here today, it's hugely important that we get our values over to our young people, which is why I'm enormously supportive of faith schools and will continue to be so.
Thank you very much. I think all the candidates answered that very honestly, which is very nice. Thank you. You all spoke about compassion when you answered that question, and the next question leads on to the penal system. These are people who have sinned and who are being punished. And the question is, we imprison more than many other nations in Western Europe, but we still have one of the highest levels of crime. And currently, prisoner deaths are running at an all-time high. There are many prison suicides as well. How can we improve our penal system? Sandy, do you want to start with that one?
When I was small, I worked in Parliament as research assistant. I was called a chocolate soldier because there was no state funding. I was funded by Rowntree. We were known as chocolate soldiers, and I worked for a man called Emlyn Hewson. Emlyn had been a distinguished QC, and he was one of the defendant counsel in the Moors murders. He defended Ian Brady. And I always remember him once saying to me, if ever you want to understand what original sin is, and that there is original sin in this world, just listen to the tapes, which of course were kept secret and only released many, many years after he had that conversation with me. Now with him, I wrote a pamphlet called Law and Order in a Civilized Society. And in that pamphlet, we were forecasting the end of the civilized world as we knew it if prison numbers rose to 40,000. They're now, I think, approaching 90,000. And frankly, it is not civilized. Winston Churchill when he became Liberal Home Secretary in the pre-First World War Liberal government, the first thing he did was to instantly release 10% of the prison population. He let them out. He opened the doors. It was done on the basis of who was nearest to their release date and also who had committed the least serious crimes. Imagine what the Mail would make of that today. But that's what he did because he was shocked and scandalised by what he found in Britain's prisons then. And he famously said, "You judge the civilization of a society by the way it treats its prisoners." Now, one of the problems, because we imprison far too many people, people who frankly often are mentally ill, and there's a real issue about mental health and lack, and again, my party has promised to put far more money into mental health, the Cinderella area of the National Health Service. And far too many in prison have committed sins, if you like, but it's because they're mentally ill. And prison is not going to solve it, it's not going to help them. The other problem is, because the prisons are so full, people that really ought to be there, there's not enough room for them. And so they're given too short sentences. It's really illuminating to compare our penal system with the Dutch. And the Dutch have a much lower number of people, percentage of people in prison, but people who commit really serious crimes are put away for longer because they've got the ability to do that. And that does seem to be sensible. So we've got to entirely rethink and get out of the kind of tabloid, kind of cheap shots about this and actually seriously say we have to have a better approach, a more humane approach, and find ways to reduce prison numbers by accepting that probably many people there need different kinds of treatment. Treatment, yes, but not imprisonment.
Thank you, Sandy. Jack, I mean, feel free to challenge the question if you want. I mean, the statement is that how can the penal system be improved? What's the Green Party's view on that?
Okay, so our vision, I've talked to high level quite often, is a principle called restorative justice. So there are echoes of what Sandy's been saying here. You minimise the list of genuinely harmful crimes. You need to work very hard on social causes. I think a lot of crime starts from a sense of alienation, not feeling part of the community, not having parts of opportunity. When we said tough on the causes of crime, that means sorting out the well-being of the least connected. And we need to get back onto that welfare side. The idea of restorative justice is to recognise that actually the person who committed the crime needs to face up to it, needs to pay back in some way, needs to try and put right, as far as it's practical and possible to do, some of the harm that they've done. It does mean jailing far fewer people. It does mean a much more sophisticated version of community service. It may mean, actually, if both parties are willing, that the victim and the perpetrator meet and work through a building of a place for that prisoner back in society. Back to the low level, we would have a separate Department of Crime Protection, Prevention, far more youth facilities, even that. Repairs and maintenance to the public fabric kept up to date rather than leaving it looking vandalised. You need to bring back caretakers, attendants, caretakers in the park. You need local police stations, not grand central police stations. You need the bobby on the beat. You need the police accountable not to some single commissioner somewhere, but to the local government. And I think it's a combination. As so many of these things, you get a big principle and then you need lots and lots and lots of policies working in the same direction. But the overall point, we do lock up too many people and we don't deal with the causes of crime.
Thank you. And do you want to answer this question next? So, do you think there's anything wrong with the penal system? Do you think it needs to be improved? And how should we treat prisoners?
This is a really complicated question to get in 3 minutes. I mean, I visited what would be considered the local prison here at Hemel Hempstead on the Mount and been to see inside. And do you know what? I think it would be a good idea if we could show a lot of our young people the insides of some of these places, because, to be quite frank, I had no real concept until I was a Member of Parliament of what prison was. I think the saddest thing about prison, and this is back to one of our earlier questions about how we get people out of poverty, the saddest thing is how many people are in there who are illiterate and who basically have been completely failed by the state school system. Yes, there are the ne'er-do-wells in there who probably, some people might say, we're always going to go down that path in life. But there are a lot of people in there who are illiterate, who are stealing to fund their drug habit. So I think if we can get education in to the young people, to stop them going down a life where they basically, once you are in that life, it is a pretty hopeless, vicious circle. And the other thing I saw, having worked with NACRO and HACRO, which is seeing how the minute these prisoners are put out the gate, if we put it that way, they are met by the mates and the ne'er-do-wells they were associating with before. They can't get into housing. Often it's hard for them to get into employment. And so we've got to break that vicious cycle where people keep going through the revolving door of going back into prison because they're still associating with all the people who are part of the original problem, whether it was their drug habit or whether it was a life where basically being illiterate they were struggling to even get on a job and it seemed easier to steal than it seemed to be able to get yourself into education. The very, very short sentences we've got now are not helping that scenario because you can't go into a programme in prison and improve your chances of turning your life around, whether it's through drug rehabilitation or whether it's through education. So I think we need to look at our sentencing structure to say that the people who really should be locked up, and the people that would benefit from other ways of tackling their chaotic lifestyle should have support in those ways. But we've also got to look at ourselves as a society. There has been quite an argument going on about people who are homeless in St Albans and where they should be placed recently in the media, and I'm sure those who have read the local papers will know. If you come out of prison, it is very, very hard. That's where HACRO helps. Very, very hard to find somewhere where you can pick yourself up and try to change yourself. You know, all of us perhaps got a few pounds to lose or get a bit fitter. None of us can do it overnight. And someone that's found that their life has been one that they wish they could change needs time and space to do so. So as a community, we've got to start looking at ourselves a bit compassionately and say, where will those people stay and live until they can get themselves around? And again, some of the people in the Mount said to me they were working in Tesco's and whatever, which was really good, on part of their day release and rehabilitation. But Tesco's can't say, we have X amount of people doing day release. Why? Because a lot of people wouldn't shop there. If I said which branch it was they use. So as a society, we've got to say if we want these people to change, we've got to give them the opportunities to change. And part of that is some of the good support that is given to the people leaving prison. But that said, people who should be in prison, not because of illness, mental illness, not because of poor education, but people who should be in prison because they've committed the most heinous crimes, then I would like to see them stay in prison and have a proper sentence. This cutting off of 50% of a tariff simply because our prisons are too full and overcrowded and stuffed with people who perhaps been in there as a result of their drug addiction or prostitution or other things that could be tackled in other ways, means that the people, like Sandy said, the people who should have long sentences, unfortunately are often being let out back in society, which I don't think where we want to see people. So education, getting to young people, and then when people come out having served their shorter sentences, helping them turn their lives around so they don't go back in that revolving door.
Okay. Kerry, the penal system and how we treat prisoners.
Thank you. I'm a trustee of NACRO, the National Association for the Care and Resettlement of Offenders, and have been for some years. We do cracking work with in prison, before prison and after prison. And over the last 4 years particularly, we've lost 700 staff. Now that's due to cutbacks in the system. 700 staff. Now these are people, key people, who would typically mentor a prisoner coming out of prison, look after their housing needs, and that is critical. So there's two aspects. There's coming out of prison, where you are housed, and then getting a job, so that you are normalised and back within society rather than without society. And it is really, really difficult. The housing bit's easy, really easy. We can do that, and we do that. There's thousands of prisoners that we, ex-prisoners that we house up and down the country. It's getting the job that's the tricky bit. It really is tricky. If you're an employer and you've got two people you're choosing from, and one's just come out of prison and the other one hasn't, it's blindingly obvious which you're not going to take a chance, are you? And I don't blame employers for that. I do understand, absolutely understand. So what we're trying to do in NACRO is to create little businesses within the organisation that these people can take part in. So that we do simple things like gardening for elderly people. Loads of that all around the place. People can't do their gardening anymore. We set up a little company, 3 or 4 of us go out and do the grass, all of that business. Painting and decorating, all of that kind of thing. So that's that side of it. On the stopping going into prison, we do good work, and I'll just give one example. It's we have a scheme in Newcastle on the Biker Estate, which is renowned for producing young criminals. The Biker Estate, where we have an animal scheme. Now, young kids who are deemed to be vulnerable, that is, they might head towards the penal system if they're not checked or held, they're given an animal to look after. It might be a rabbit, a guinea pig, whatever it might be, it is their responsibility. And for many of them, most of them, it is the first time in their lives they are being given anything to care for, to look after. It is their responsibility. This makes them grow in all sorts of different ways. Now, the other thing we like to do is work within the prison so that we are preparing prisoners for when they come out. And that again is talking about the things that Anne mentioned about getting them away from the people that they were with before. So that breaking that link, that's really important. And that might mean relocating to another part of the country so that they are removed. Now the question was, are we putting too many people in prison? Absolutely. I visited prisons all up and down the country, and I've visited prisons in other countries. The one that struck me positively was the system they have in Norway, where they have local prisons. And these are just ordinary houses, where there are 2 or 3 houses put together, where people will live, but have to be work during the day and then back in at night time. So they are imprisoned overnight, but work in the community. Far too many people in prison, far too many, thousands too many. We need to do much better. And some of the ways I suggested might be helpful.
Thank you very much. I know some people are going to collect children now, but if you're not collecting children, we'll just keep going with this for a little bit longer. The thing I'm struck by that answer is all of you said that certainly some prisoners shouldn't be in there. People are in there for short sentences. Yet, when I think we see the manifestos for the parties for the 7th of May, I'm not sure that any of them are going to say fewer people should go to prison. I mean, okay, it's sad as they are, but if you don't mind, I won't ask you to come back on that because you've corrected me there. But that's just one of the things that I was struck by, that you all actually said the same thing. I'd like to move on to another question now that was submitted to Tony a little bit later. So the candidates didn't see this in advance, and this is to do with the persecuted church in the Middle East. So we're moving on to foreign policy a little bit more now. We've still got a few more minutes, so let's make sure we just cover some of this. And the question is this. The Middle East has long been a cradle of religious coexistence. For the first time ever, some Middle Eastern countries look set to become Christian-free zones. How can British foreign policy support the global struggle for religious freedom and freedom of worship? Kerry, do you want to start on that?
Well, I think the Palestinian problem, the relation between Palestine and Israel, is critical in the international situation. I've been to Israel. I've also been to the Palestinian areas, and the difference between the two is absolutely stark. Where you've got prosperity in Israel and you've got austerity permanently almost in the Palestinian areas. I profess to be a Catholic. I'm also Muslim, I'm Buddhist, I'm Jewish, I'm Palestinian. Whatever it takes to be one of God's children. We're all God's children, we're all together. We love our brothers and our sisters and must portray that in everything that we do. It seems to me that the blockade of the Palestine areas must be lifted. I see no rhyme or reason for that to be carried on. Totally opposed to that. I think Israel has got to stop building in the settlements. I think that they're two prerequisites. I think some of the Arab countries could do more to facilitate peace. I'm thinking particularly of Saudi Arabia, that could, if they wanted to, could make every Palestinian a multimillionaire overnight and not notice the change from that. And that seems to be about prosperity, security for both of those nations, both Israel and Palestine, so that they can live in peace and harmony together. And that is my first prayer every night.
Thank you very much. Sandy, do you want to go next? Kerry spoke about Israel and Palestine, which is obviously central to this, but also we do see in Syria and Iraq a treatment of the persecuted church, which has been quite startling. How can British foreign policy support religious freedom in places where religious freedom is so under threat?
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to say I'm just a bit bemused by Kerry's answer, which seems to me to be answering an entirely different question. And the question was, obviously I can hear that, but it's not the question that was asked. Actually, it's worth noting that the richest segment of population in Israel are the Christians. And they are the richest. And the poorest, by the way, and one of the biggest scandals in that part of the world, are the Bedouin. And the Bedouin, who are the original inhabitants of Israel and the West Bank and Palestine, are appallingly treated on both sides of that community. But the question was about persecution and the disappearance of Christians. And, of course, it's not new. The Armenian massacres are something which, tend to be forgotten, not talked about much in this country. And absolutely shocking near genocide practiced by the then Ottoman Empire during the First World War. And realistic,
Get it right. Get it right. Get it right.
Major scar.
That wasn't the
on
question.
the memory of that nation.
Shame of you.
Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people marched into the desert to die. More recently, the shocking attacks on Coptic Christians. I've got Coptic friends who live in this country, and the other cathedral in Hertfordshire, let us not forget, is the Coptic Cathedral in Stevenage. That is the Coptic Cathedral in this country, just up the road. Now, one of the encouraging things, I think, was the way that Muslim Egypt absolutely was outraged and went to war and attacked targets in Libya because of what had happened to its citizens who were Coptic Christians. And that gave me a glimmer of hope, because one of the problems has been the kind of monotheistic view of Islam in some places in the Middle East, where they have been just turning a blind eye to what is happening to minority religions. And for example, one of the unexpected byproducts in Iraq was actually Saddam Hussein was a horrible, horrible, horrible man, but actually he was reasonably good at protecting minority religious rights. Assad was reasonably good at protecting minority religious rights.
Answer the question.
Some of the other. So the question then is what we do. Now, the Egypt and what it's done, I think, is encouraging, and we have to support with our foreign policy, with our government, countries like that who are stepping up to the plate. The evidence is that direct interference from Britain, frankly, has been counterproductive, which is why we have to support countries there to do the right thing.
Thank you very much. Jack, how can British foreign policy support the struggle for religious freedom and freedom of worship?
I think the most honest thing to say, that's a really difficult question to pitch just before we arrive. I think the most I can say, rather than give you a history lesson or pick out some other random part of the world to talk about, is that this is about human rights, fundamental human rights, the right to free association and the right to your own religious beliefs. And therefore it is important that our policy, and through the United Nations and others, that we focus on securing those issues. But to suggest that there is some quick or cheap answer to a very powerful group that has formed that view and is taking very aggressive actions that can come from here, it is asking a lot. We really have to make our voices heard, that human rights are critical. We have to work with the positive forces. You have to make clear that you're unhappy with the dark forces. But I don't have a trick in my back pocket to such a complicated question as that.
Thank you. Anne, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, there was a recent report that showed that 41 countries where the persecution of Christians shows it was actually maintaining the same or increasing. So only 3 countries were showing a decrease in the persecution of Christians. So I think we have to be very mindful that there are many, many countries in the world where it is just plain dangerous to be a Christian or even to voice those views. And we have to speak up. And I believe as a Christian country, as the Prime Minister said, we have our duty to call into account countries where they are persecuting faith, whether it's Christian faith or any faith. I'm sure I'm as concerned as anyone is about the beheading of 21 Coptic Christians. It is simply appalling. But what we do have is we do have our purse. We give a lot of money in international aid, and I think we should scrutinise where we give international aid. 13 billion was given as part of our humanitarian aid. But for example, we give a lot of aid to Bangladesh. We are the biggest bilateral donor to Bangladesh. And yet I've had representations from Christians in Bangladesh and from other faiths as well, Hindus and Sikhs and so on, but from Christians saying, that they are persecuted in Bangladesh, particularly in the rural areas. Now, when you think that that is a supposedly notable, a secular country, that we are the biggest aid donor to, I think we should be using more clout through where we give aid to say that if people are being persecuted as a result of their faith, and if it's a result of their Christian faith, we should have serious questions answered from their government, or use that clout to say, well, then our aid may well be withdrawn if you can't demonstrate that you are actively allowing and fostering a multi-faith community. Because there's no excuse for us to be able to give aid to a country that's supported in one way, when at the same time they are potentially abusing people who we feel we have an affinity with in faith. And I think it's going to be a very, very tough thing to say to a country. We are perhaps withholding or reducing or keeping back some aid, but I would rather see the aid go through Christian partners or other agencies such as BRAC and Sight Savers, and not actually give it to the government itself, which we do on occasions, that is oppressing the people of faith in their own country. And that way I think we would actually hit them where it hurts, in their pockets.
As we are short of time, I'm just going to say a couple of things, and I'm going to ask each of the 4 candidates here to say in 30 seconds why you should vote for them. Before I finish, there are 2 important things to say. The first important thing to say is we did invite UKIP to come here, and Chris Wright said he was going to come. We were expecting him to be here this morning. So we're not excluding any of the major parties here. I don't know why he didn't come, but just so everyone is clear that we're being fair here. The other thing I do have to say is please check that you are registered to vote in St Albans, because the system has changed and many people who think they're registered are not registered, so that's a very important thing to do. I'm going to ask each candidate to sum up in 30... it's probably... phone the council is the best thing, it's the easiest and quickest answer. After they've all summed up, I'm going to ask the question to see if anyone has just made their decision who to vote for based on this morning's session. Sandy, would you like to sum up first? 30 seconds, I'm going to be strict on timing.
It's likely there's going to be another coalition government. We don't know what
I hope
shape.
not.
And that means that a shopping list of policies is very dangerous, and it's values that matter. And Lib Dem values are freedom, fairness, green, international. And that will be the prism if elected through which I will look at any policy that comes forward from any government of whatever makeup. Freedom, fairness, green, international.
Thank you. Anne, do you want to say why we should vote for you and the Conservative Party in May?
I am a Conservative, I'm proud to say I am, but I'm also a rebel. Anyone that votes for me knows I speak up for them and St Albans. I'm not afraid to defy the whip. I work 100% for you and your family, no outside jobs, no second interests, and I believe in speaking up for you, and I listen to you. 22,000 people contacted me, and I make sure I get back to them as quickly as possible. I may not always be right, and I may not always have the right answer that you like, but I'll do my best to listen and speak up for you.
Yeah.
Speaking as somebody who stuck to their 1-minute answer brief, I'll do my best. I think there are a number of ways of putting it, but I reach back in time to a concept of the major parties being 3 lanes of a motorway going in the wrong direction. I guess UKIP is the hard shoulder, still going in the wrong direction. Unless we put sustainability at the heart of it, unless you vote for a party that puts sustainability first, we won't be having discussions like this for our grandchildren.
very much, Jack. And finally, Kerry Coyle.
Thank you. I have a vision of what St Albans needs to be, and we have got big decisions to make about health, housing and other issues. I want to take part in that. And also say that I've done 30 odd years